The story of an old woman who stood up to 5 legendary motorcyclists at Claire's Corner Diner in the sleepy village of Mill Creek, Virginia, changed the lives of countless people. A confrontational moment was turned into a movement of hope that spread throughout the community by Evelyn Mason, a 78-year-old battle nurse during the Vietnam War. Instead of finding an easy target, the Shadow Warriors motorcycle gang discovered a natural force that would not only defend themselves but also demonstrate a new sort of strength that would transform known outlaws into community guardians. What transpired at Claire's Corner Diner that night would be seen by millions of people online, lead to a national movement in support of veterans, and demonstrate that sometimes the most effective wars are fought with courage, knowledge, and an unshakable faith in human potential rather than with fists or weapons. Let's have a little rest. Please let us know where you are tuning in. Remember to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, since tomorrow's story will be something very exceptional. Long shadows were produced by the sunset sun through Claire's Corner Diner's windows, causing dust particles to dance in the golden light above the faded vinyl booths. Evelyn Mason was sitting in the corner where she had been spending every evening for the previous 15 years since the death of her husband, Thomas. Martha, the head waitress, always had a coffee cup full, and her grizzled hands were wrapped around it. Pat's cardigan's little purple heart pin, which most customers seldom noticed, captured the last of the waning sunshine. Although nothing in her easygoing demeanor indicated she was anything more than another senior citizen sipping her evening coffee, her little figure exuded a sense of peaceful dignity at the age of 78. Claire Thompson, the diner's owner for more than 20 years, brought a fresh pot of coffee to Pat's table. As she went with the precision of someone who had walked these identical shadows hundreds of times, her cozy shoes made a little squeak sound against the recently washed floor. Claire said with the warmth of a long-standing friendship, "Evening, Pat." As usual. Pat folded her newspaper carefully and nodded. "Claire, you know me too well. How's nursing school going for your granddaughter?" Claire automatically topped off Pat's coffee, beaming with pride. "Although I still find it hard to believe that you haven't discussed being a combat nurse in all these years until that piece was published last month," the top student in her class said that the stories you gave about the field hospital in Vietnam inspired her. With a familiar sadness in her eyes, Pat answered, "Some things are better left quiet. Besides, I've moved on from that phase of my life." In the parking lot, motorcycle motors roared, shattering the tranquil evening scene. 5 motorcycles with chrome glittering in the waning light finally arrived as the rumble became louder. With a purposeful swagger, the riders disembarked, all sporting leather cuts with Shadow Warriors patches. As they stepped inside, their big boots banging on the linoleum, the bell above the entrance chimed. Wolf, their commander, was a tall man who had the arrogant assurance of someone accustomed to bullying others. His second-in-command, Venom, stood behind him, scanning the cafe with a predatory gaze as Eagle, Lion, and Viper dispersed across the room. Wolf's voice roared throughout the cafe, "Well, well. What's in here? It appears that we have located a retirement community." With years of experience in a conflict zone, Pat's tactical mind quickly assessed the scenario as she viewed their reflection in the window. Wolf's posture showed a slight preference to his right side, and he was probably around 6'2" and 240 pounds. As the others took up positions around the diner, Venom kept his right hand close to his vest pocket. When a young waitress rushed past Viper, he purposely protruded his foot, making her trip. Ice cubes skittered over the linoleum as the glass of water she was carrying broke on the floor. Viper sneered, "Oops. You had better tidy that up, my love." The waitress knelt to collect the shattered glass, her hands shaking. In an attempt to keep her 2 young children out of the biker's line of sight, a mother nearby started to stealthily gather their belongings. "What's the matter with the child?" One child whimpered in fear, and Wolf laughed. "Perhaps Mama needs some companionship to feel better." With panic visible in her eyes, the mother drew her kids closer while attempting to figure out how to get to the door. Some patrons moved uneasily in their chairs, leaving cash on their tables and exiting quickly. Martha took a step forward, her voice a little hesitant but resolute. "This is a family business, gentlemen." "Grandma, stop talking," Venom interrupted her. "We now determine the type of establishment this is." Pat carefully placed her coffee cup down, the gentle clink somehow resonating across the now quiet dining room. She stood with deliberate movements and spoke to the riders in a steady, clear voice. "Get out of the way, the woman and her kids are heading out." The shadow warriors turned to face her, briefly taken aback by her cool-headed intervention. A sarcastic smile split Wolf's face as he strode over to her booth. "Would you have a look at this, then?" He put his hands on either side of her table and bent down. "It appears that the grandma of someone has lost her manners." Pat steadily met his stare, her unflinching poise a testament to decades of experience dealing with far more serious challenges. Wolf hadn't noticed yet, but the dusk sun hit her purple heart pin once more. In fact, she answered in the same soothing voice she had used to comfort injured soldiers. "I believe you guys need a manners lesson." As the other motorcyclists surrounded her booth, the tension in the cafe became even more. Martha, divided between assisting Pat and securing the other patrons, watched in increasing alarm as Claire vanished into the kitchen, most likely to contact the police. What followed will alter not only that night but the Mill Creek neighborhood as a whole. The encounter between 5 infamous bikers and an elderly veteran was set to show that true strength can take many forms and that sometimes the most potent weapon isn't a threat or a fist, but rather the ability to perceive the potential for change in even the most resolute hearts. Wolf straightened up and loomed over Pat's diminutive frame, his laughter resonating throughout the cafe. "You don't know who you're dealing with, lady. This place simply became our turf since we are the Shadow Warriors." Pat's motions were cautious and controlled as her hand slid slowly to her pocketbook. The bikers stiffened, but woman pulled out a battered leather pocketbook in place of a firearm. She cautiously opened it to show a military ID and multiple medals that gleamed in the last of the sunlight. 1968 to 71 in Vietnam. Army Nurse Corps, she said sarcastically. "Young man, I've treated more gunshot wounds than you have tattoos. I've saved people from the edge of death and held dying men in my arms. Therefore, I don't expect you to accept any of this. Respect is something I expect you to learn." Venom stepped forward, his bluster waning a bit as he examined the awards. "Grandma, anyone can purchase medals from a surplus store." "That's true," Pat said, adopting a tone that had once soothed frightened men during mortar assaults. "However, not everyone can tell you about the night our field hospital was directly targeted on February 12, 1969. The generator had just failed, and we had 17 men on stretchers who were badly injured." As she went on, the memory flashed across her eyes. "That night, with the incoming fire so near that we could feel the heat from the explosions, I conducted emergency surgery by flashlight. Please pardon me if I'm not impressed when you use your playground techniques to frighten me." The youngest of the bunch, Viper, suddenly sprang forward and tried to seize Pat's wallet. Compared to the skilled fighters she had encountered, his move was amateur and telegraphed. He staggered into an empty booth while Pat moved deftly away and used his momentum. Viper sprawled uncomfortably as dishes clattered to the floor. Anger colored Wolf's face. His fist swung enormously, but Pat had seen it coming. She quickly swept his knees out from under him and dove beneath his swing. With enough force to rattle the diner windows, the large man fell to the ground. Pat carried on quietly in the field hospital, as though she hadn't just dropped a man twice her size. We discovered that technique is far more important than size. Treating injured soldiers while under fire teaches you how to deal with people of all sizes and personalities. As Venom assisted Wolf in standing up, Eagle and Lion positioned themselves to either side of her. Although the leader's nose was bleeding, his pride was more severely damaged. Wolf growled and wiped blood from his face, saying, "You're going to regret this. Shadow warriors are not messed with." Pat answered with a casual yet prepared stance, "I've heard that kind of talk before. Usually from individuals who have no idea what actual battle looks like." The characteristic of true warriors is their ability to defend others. They are not frightened by them. The air was filled with the sound of sirens approaching. Martha started assisting the mother and her kids to the door as Claire came out of the kitchen, phone still in hand. Claire made a solid announcement, "Police are 2 minutes out. Boys, you might want to carefully consider your next course of action." Pat stayed put, putting herself in the way of the motorcyclists and the other patrons. "Now you have a decision to make. You can either depart as the group that was assaulted by an old woman, or you can depart contemplating why a battlefield nurse would put herself in danger to defend strangers in a dining establishment." Wolf gazed at her, his face changing in some way. He stared at his bleeding reflection in the diner glass as the sirens grew louder. The hard facade briefly broke, letting a glimmer of doubt show. He mumbled, "This isn't over," but his heart wasn't in it. "Actually, it is," Pat said, "but you decide how to end it. You have two options: either discover what true strength looks like, or keep attempting to gain strength via fear." It took us a long time to prepare and tell this story, so please subscribe to our channel if you find it entertaining. It means a lot to us. Let's return to the narrative. Red and blue lights painted the diner windows as the first police car arrived into the parking lot. The first person in the door was Officer Martinez, who was observing the event with his hand on his pistol. Wolf's bloodied nose, broken plates, upturned chairs, and Pat standing composedly in the midst of it all. "Is everyone in this place okay?" Martinez's gaze was on Pat when he asked. "Just a minor argument on appropriate dining manners. I think these gentlemen were just leaving," Pat said calmly. Martinez glanced back at Pat after glancing at the bikers. "Do you wish to file charges?" After giving it some thought, Pat shook her head. "No, Wolf, I believe we all learned something tonight." The biker leader glanced at her for a moment, then averted his gaze. Pat recognized something in Wolf's attitude from her time in Vietnam as the Shadow Warriors filed out of the cafe. The expression of a person whose entire perspective has just been upended. As the motorcyclists departed, the other patrons erupted in cheers, but Pat dismissed them. Her coffee had gone cold, so she went back to her booth. Martha, her hands still trembling a little, rushed over with a new pot. "That was amazing," Martha muttered. "Where did you acquire the skill?" "Combat medicine is more than just wound care," Pat said, taking the fresh coffee. "Sometimes you have to deal with those who are in shock and calm down aggressive patients. We learned a lot from the army." With admiration and anxiety in her eyes, Claire slid into the booth opposite Pat. "Do you think they might return?" Satisfied that she was completely steady, Pat took a drink of her coffee. "Perhaps. However, I have a feeling that things will be different when they do." She observed the Shadow Warriors mounting their motorcycles via the window. Wolf stared at his reflection in the chrome as he sat on his motorcycle for the longest time without starting it. Pat was aware of that moment of introspection. She had witnessed it innumerable times in the faces of injured troops who had recently realized how vulnerable they were. "Do you know what's odd?" As the bikers eventually rode off, Pat pondered. "That seemed more significant than anything I accomplished up Shadow." "In what way?" Claire inquired. "Because this time, I was fighting for something rather than just against it. For these individuals, for this place. At home, we can sometimes make the most difference." Pat had no idea how foretelling those statements would turn out to be. The gears of change were already turning as she sipped her coffee and observed the police cars leaving. Evelyn Mason, calm life was about to become much more intriguing, and the reputation of troublemaking that the Shadow Warriors had earned was about to change completely. The video had received over 100,000 views by midnight. The entire altercation was recorded on a phone by someone in the diner, and the video quickly went viral on social media. When Pat woke up, her phone was constantly vibrating with calls, messages, and notifications from national news organizations. According to one article, a Vietnam veteran protects cafe diners by taking out 5 bikers. Another said that a former war nurse demonstrates the full meaning of service. In the hopes of a typical day, Pat chose to ignore them all and went to work at the Veterans Center. However, normalcy was no longer in the cards. Her center co-worker, Maria Santos, barged into her office while brandishing her phone. "Did you notice this?" Maria cried out. "It is present everywhere. This morning, my daughter showed me the video. Because you are real, you are superior to a guardian angel." Pat arranged files on her desk in an attempt to minimize it. Maria, "It's not really that important." Simply took the action that anyone would. Maria, seated opposite from Pat's desk, insisted, "No. You served as a reminder that veterans are more than just seasoned combatants narrating their experiences. We continue to serve and protect. How many female veterans have been sharing this, do you know? They now have a voice because to you." Pat's office phone rang before she could reply. Martha from the diner was there. "You must come down here, Pat, honey. There's something going on." "Problem?" Pat was on his feet and prepared to go. "No, just. You ought to witness this yourself." 15 minutes later, Pat pulled up in the parking lot of Claire's Corner Diner. People were really waiting outside to enter since the area was that crowded. The cluster of motorcycles parked in the lot's corner, however, was what truly drew her attention. Other local motorcycle gangs, not shadow warriors. Betty hurried to her inside. She pointed to the bikers strewn about the diner and said, "They've been coming all morning. Various clubs from throughout the region are apologizing and not causing disturbance. Ms. Mason, you got a moment?" A big man in a leather vest, wearing a patch that identified him as the president of the Iron Knights MC, Claire from his booth. Knowing that everyone in the diner was watching, Pat approached. The motorcyclist held out his hand. "Mike is his name. I speak for a number of local, respectable motorcycle groups. What took place here last night? We're not here for that. All bikers are negatively portrayed by the shadow warriors. We wanted to let you know that we are here to help this business and its patrons." The door of the diner opened again before Pat could answer. Everyone looked around. The youngest of the shadow warriors, Viper, was there, but he had lost his colors. He had lost his normal swagger and was now unsure of himself. "Mason, Miss," his voice trembled a little. "Can we have a private conversation?" With a nod, Pat ushered him to her typical corner booth. At first, the young man was unable to look her in the eyes. Then he answered, "I served in Afghanistan. Infantry in the army. I didn't fit in anywhere when I got home. You know, the shadow warriors were like brothers again. However, you reminded me of my former sergeant when I watched you last night. Constantly in charge, constantly looking out for others. And now?" Pat inquired softly. "It's not just me, but I want out." Viper lowered his voice and leaned forward. "Wolf. James is his true name. He had spent the entire night talking. He was really affected by your statement that you should be a protector rather than a threat. You know that he has a daughter. After watching the video this morning, she contacted him in tears and questioned him about his bullying behavior." Pat took some time to absorb this information. "Son, what are you requesting?" "Help. For all of us, not just for me. The majority of the shadow warriors were lost and searching for the sense of purpose that we had in the army. You demonstrated to us that there are alternative forms of strength." Everyone was attempting to listen in as the diner fell silent. Pat knew the phones were still recording and that this could be another pivotal moment. Finally, she continued, "The Veterans Center opens at 9. Bring everyone who wishes to change, and stop by tomorrow. We'll find a solution." Hope glowed in Viper's eyes. "Really? Even after our actions? Particularly in light of what you did, as you are demonstrating my point. Intimidation is not the essence of true strength. It all comes down to having the guts to make the change." Mike came over again as Viper walked away, dabbing at his tears. "We'll assist," he replied plainly. "The reputable clubs will encourage any shadow warriors who wish to change their ways." As usual, Martha showed up grinning at the house with coffee. "Martha, you can't continue to give me free coffee." The waitress smiled and watched me. "Besides, company is doing really well. Examine your surroundings." Pat did have a look around. There was an odd mix in the diner. Children's families, bikers from different clubs, and veterans who watched the video and came to provide support. Everyone was conversing, exchanging tales, and forming bonds. Another news outlet wanted to interview her, so her phone buzzed once more. Pat didn't ignore it this time, though. Perhaps the time had come to share this tale, not only of a single altercation in a cafe, but of soldiers returning home, of atonement, and of how, on sometimes, the proper sort of power can turn foes into comrades. She shouted out to Mike, who offered to help. "Let's discuss specifics." Pat became aware that what had begun as a straightforward discussion was turning into something much more significant when she took out a notebook and started making plans. The brawl wasn't the only reason the video went viral. People were eager for stories like this. One in where confrontation breeds camaraderie, adversaries turn into friends, and defending others is more important than displaying toughness. And this was only the start. She saw Wolf's motorcycle arrive into the parking lot through the diner window. Without his shadow warrior's cut, he was alone himself. Additionally, his expression displayed the kind of hesitancy that frequently accompanied the most significant changes. Pat wanted to be ready for anything, so he got at the Veterans Center early the following morning. The first motorcycle thundered into the parking lot at 8:45. Without his shadow warrior's cut, Wolf was alone himself. Something more vulnerable took the place of his typically menacing demeanor. Pat met him at the door and said, "Didn't think you'd be first." "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice no longer abrasive. "I've been rewatching that video, observing myself and our transformation." He took his phone out and showed Pat a photo of a little girl, perhaps 12 years old. "This is my daughter, Amy. She questioned me when I quit being her hero and turned into a bully when she called me in tears yesterday morning." Pat led him inside the center and unlocked the entrance. Hearing that must have been difficult. "I've never heard something so difficult. Even more difficult than when her mother said I would never change and left." James and Wolf trailed her inside, admiring the veterans' pictures and the resources displayed on the walls. "I never imagined getting here." Outside, more motorcycles arrived. Mike from the Iron Knights and a few of his members arrived after Viper and 3 other shadow warriors arrived. The center's conference room was packed with unsure faces and leather vests by 9 o'clock. Pat was at the front, observing the improbable group. "Who would like to go first, then?" Viper held out his hand. "I was in the 2nd Infantry in Afghanistan. Everything felt off when I got home. Too normal, too quiet. What I was lacking was provided by the shadow warriors. Adrenaline, brotherhood, and purpose, but the wrong kind of purpose." Others started to share. 5 of the 12 shadow warriors in attendance were veterans who, for a variety of reasons, had not finished their service. 3 were the sons of soldiers who had never been able to serve on their own. They were all searching for something they couldn't quite put their finger on. Pulling out a whiteboard, Pat declared, "This is what we're going to do. We're beginning a program for motorbike maintenance first. Veterans in need of transportation can learn from Mike and the Iron Knights. We'll receive assistance with bike repairs." She continued writing on the board. "Rebuilding families, helping veterans, and performing community service." James got to his feet. "My daughter's school is the place I want to speak with. Inform them of what took place. Teach them how to improve upon me." Pat nodded, "Good. That is now also on the list." 3 hours were spent in the meeting. They had a plan toward the end. Something new would replace the Shadow Warriors when they disbanded. A community service and motorcycle maintenance support club for veterans and their families. Viper looked around at his old gang members and said, "We need a new name." Someone yelled, "Guardians, because we are now defending the neighborhood rather than frightening it." The room's energy changed. The eyes were sparkling with purpose, and the men who had entered looking defeated were sitting up straighter. Pat knew that expression. She had witnessed it in innumerable warriors who at last discovered their own identity. Pat went back to Claire's Corner diner later that day. Martha wasn't by herself, but she had managed to save her typical booth. She was accompanied by Maria from the Veterans Center. Pat sat down and Maria remarked, "Heard about this morning." Word spread quickly. "Do you understand what this means? That I will never again enjoy a cup of coffee in peace?" "No," Maria chuckled. "It indicates that we are witnessing something novel and significant." The fight was the main emphasis when the video went viral, but what's happening today is the true narrative. Without being asked, Martha brought coffee. "It's getting to be quite the spot," she said. "Families, bikers, and veterans all mingle." We had lunch with a few of the previous Shadow Warriors. In the parking lot, they assisted an elderly couple in changing a flat tire. Pat's cell rang. James had left a message. "Amy would like to meet you. She claims that she wants to learn the proper way to be strong, just like her father is learning." Pat considered how much had changed in 2 days as she typed a response. Although a few minutes of action were captured on the viral film, the true shift was taking place right now in the form of quiet moments and minor decisions. As more motorcyclists entered the diner parking lot, Maria thought, "We're going to need a bigger veteran center." Words are spreading. Veterans are contacting us from other towns to see if we can assist in launching a similar initiative there. Pat warned her to take it slow, but she was grinning. "First, let's make sure this works." She saw through the window as Viper assisted an elderly veteran in getting off his motorcycle, treating his walker with the same deference that he had once shown his rifle. In the vicinity, a young veteran's wife was being instructed by 2 ex-Shadow Warriors on how to check the oil in her motorcycle. "What's actually changing, do you know?" Martha slipped into the booth with them and inquired. Finding their path isn't the only issue facing veterans. Everyone needs to be reminded of the true meaning of community. Pat nodded as he considered Viper positively finding his fighting spirit and James and his daughter. About how connection has been made possible by a confrontational moment. Occasionally, she remarked, observing the erstwhile adversaries conversing and sipping coffee. "Teaching others to be strong is the strongest thing you can do." Even though the change was only getting started, Pat could already see the effects extending. What had begun as an anti-bullying stance was becoming into something much more. An example of how towns may recover, how veterans could find meaning in their lives, and how even the most improbable individuals could become positive influences. The Veterans Center parking lot had become an unplanned motorcycle workshop a week after the dining incident. A straightforward maintenance program has developed into something far more important. Pat observed James, who was once known as Wolf, instructing a group of Vietnam veterans in the fundamentals of motorcycle maintenance. James demonstrated an oil change and highlighted that steady hands are the key. "Everything we do here is based on accuracy and respect, both for the machine and for one another, just like you guys taught me." His daughter Amy was sitting at a folding table nearby, meticulously planning a schedule for the increasing number of veterans in need of assistance. At the age of 12, she had taken on the role of unofficial secretary for the program, feeling proud that her father was once again someone she could look up to. Amy waved a notebook and cried out, "Ms. Mason. Mr. Thompson from the hardware shop wants to provide tools, and 3 additional veterans have signed up for the basic maintenance class that is scheduled for next week." Pat approached and saw the purposeful gleam in the little girl's eyes. In addition to the former Shadow Warriors, their families were also being impacted by the change. Amy muttered, "Dad is different now," while Pat studied the itinerary. "He grins more. He assisted me with my schoolwork last night, like he always did. Prior to things going bad. They noticed a ruckus at the entryway. A bunch of motorcyclists, each with a box of tools and parts, were led by Mike from the Iron Knights. A truck from Thompson's Hardware was backing into the lot behind them, carrying storage units and workbenches. Mike put down his box and declared a community gift. There are rumors circulating regarding your actions here. They're not only handouts. Local companies want to make wise investments. The hub was now bustling with activity. Viper was imparting knowledge he had gained from his service to a group of younger veterans on how to handle electrical systems. A wheelchair-bound veteran was being assisted by two other former Shadow Warriors in modifying his bike to make it simpler to access. Maria eagerly waved a paper as she raced out of the office. You must see this, Pat. Do you recall the troublesome youngsters the court ordered to perform community service? Just now, their probation officer phoned. Attendance has increased by 100% since they began working with our veterans. 2 of them have part-time work at nearby repair shops, while 3 have returned to school. Pat observed one of these young people working closely with a Vietnam veteran on overhauling a carburetor. In their mutual focus, the age difference between them appeared to vanish. Martha said, bringing coffee to the employees, it's like you've built a bridge. For many, the center became an unofficial second home when she started bringing goods from the cafe. These children needed role models, the veterans needed a reason to live, and in some ways, repairing motorcycles also fixes people. Attention was being drawn to the success. James was interviewed about the program's impact by a local news crew that had set up shop in the parking lot. Parts of his interview were overheard by Pat. He was stating, I used to think that being strong meant making people fear you. However, Ms. Mason demonstrated to us that true strength is the ability to use one's abilities to help others. Every bicycle we repair, every veteran we assist, and every child we guide. That's warrior spirit in action, not simply community service. But there were difficulties with success as well. Pat saw some elderly soldiers standing away, observing with doubtful eyes. Not everyone believed that repairing motorcycles was a suitable approach to assist veterans, or that ex-gang members could reform. Taking note of Pat's worry, Maria suggested that they be given some time. Eventually, they will see what we do. General Maxwell from the nearby VA office arrived as a surprise visiting in the afternoon. He walked around the building, watching the proceedings closely. You have an impressive operation here, Pat, he replied at last. I can't dispute the outcomes, but it's very different from conventional veteran support programs. How do you respond to the doubters? Pat pointed to the area where James was currently teaching his daughter Amy how to use simple tools. I allowed them to view that. Nothing persuades people more than witnessing actual change in action. The general gave a contemplative nod. The VA has been keeping tabs on your development. Similar programs are being asked to be implemented in other towns. It's possible that you started something more significant than you thought. The events of the day came to an end as the sun started to set. In the parking lot, veterans and their families stayed, telling stories and planning projects for the next day. The teenagers assisted with cleanup. Even when their community service hours ended, they continued to return. What's the true miracle, you know? Martha, gathering up empty coffee cups, inquired. Now notice how effortless this feels. People would have fled when they saw these bikers a few weeks ago. People now turn to them for support. Pat observed James locking up the tool shed while his daughter held the clipboard containing the schedule for the next day with pride. Viper was talking to a reporter nearby about how he had been able to navigate his own path home from combat by dealing with veterans. Pat retorted, the fact that they always had this in them is the true miracle. All they needed was someone to notice. Pat saw a new sign being put up over the center's entrance as the final motorcycle thundered out of the parking lot. The teenagers had succeeded in their metalworking course. The Veterans Restoration Program. One bike at a time, lives are being rebuilt. The newly painted letters on the sign shone brightly in the evening light. Nothing they could have predicted was developing from what had begun as a desperate moment in a diner. An example of a community healing itself, one minor fix at a time. 1 month into the program's success, the crisis struck without warning. When Pat's phone rang in the morning, James's voice was tight. "In town is the Steel Legion. They are accusing us of betraying the lifestyle and claiming that we have softened. In an attempt to scare our veterans, they have started following them home." The Steel Legion was worse than the Shadow Warriors, yet they were still everything. They had established a violent reputation in 3 states, and now they were going after the Veterans Restoration Program. When Pat got there, she discovered Mike and James waiting at the center. It seemed oddly quiet in the parking lot. Veterans had avoided conflict by staying away. Last night, they cornered one of our senior veterans at the petrol station. Mike gave a somber report. Referred to him as a coward for taking assistance from former criminals. Claimed that by pretending to be community helpers, we are demeaning actual bikers. "Where is Viper?" Noting his absence, Pat inquired. James ran a hand through his hair and remarked, "That's the other thing. They have been attempting to entice our younger men to return to their former way of life. Granting them Legion membership. While Viper has remained steadfast, several of the others are faltering." Amy was sitting at her customary workstation inside the center. She was wiping away tears instead of organizing in her usual happy manner. When Pat came over, she stated, "They called Dad a sellout at my school, claimed that they would teach him the consequences of betraying others." Pat's eyes darkened, but her voice stayed calm. "Amy, your father isn't a sellout. More bravery than any of them had ever seen in him." There were more difficulties in the morning. From the diner, Martha called. During their meal, members of the Steel Legion had subtly threatened to clean up the town. Similar visits were made to nearby companies that sponsored the initiative. Maria, who was monitoring reports of intimidation, noted that they were attempting to isolate us. Make the community too afraid to back the initiative. Everyone was assembled in the main room by Pat. Mike, James, their core group of veterans, and the other surviving former Shadow Warriors. She informed them that now was the time. "Here, we demonstrate what true strength looks like." James spoke firmly as he stood. "I used to employ similar strategies, so I am familiar with them. They expect us to either back down and show that we're weak or fight back and show that we're still thugs. However, we no longer follow those guidelines." "What is the strategy?" Arriving in the middle of the conference, Viper inquired. Instead of gang symbols, patches from the Veterans Restoration Program were now attached to his leather vest. Observing the resolve on their expressions, Pat grinned. "Here, we show them what we have constructed. Through demonstration rather than conflict." The strategy came together in a flash. That afternoon, Steel Legion members arrived at the center expecting to find it defensive or deserted, but instead they discovered a full parking lot. Along with scores of community members, local business owners, and police officers, veterans and their families had returned in force. The Legion had never seen anything like the tableau that met them. James was instructing a group of children, including his daughter, in motorcycle safety. Martha offered coffee for the elder veterans to discuss memories while Viper worked with adolescents in the repair bay. The leader of the Legion, a man named Rage, got off his bike, obviously unsteady from the quiet. "Wolf, what sort of game is this?" James calmly responded, "Not Wolf anymore," as he assisted Amy in adjusting her safety goggles. "This isn't a game, and it's just James now. This is the appearance of true strength." Pat moved forward, somehow controlling the distance between the two groups with her petite form. "We invite you to enroll in our basic maintenance course, gentlemen. Here, we're imparting useful skills that could benefit many members of your communities." Rage snarled, "We came for lessons, old woman." However, his gaze kept straying to the surroundings. Families sharing meals, teens learning trades, and veterans working alongside former gang members. It was not at all the feeble capitulation they had anticipated. "Why did you come, then?" Pat inquired softly. "To demonstrate something. Examine your surroundings. Something important is being built by these folks you term traitors. Instead of tearing people down, they are utilizing their strength to uplift them. That isn't becoming softer. That's becoming more powerful than you could have ever dreamed." Amy approached with a clipboard. "We have a spot available in the electrical systems class tomorrow," she stated calmly and without fear. "Experienced riders could be of great assistance to some of our veterans." The Legion's strong posture appeared to be undermined by the ridiculousness of a 12-year-old girl offering a class schedule. Viper was training teenagers how to diagnose engine problems in the maintenance bay, and some of its younger members were openly gazing at it. James, who was standing next to his daughter, remarked, "You can threaten us. The situation is now bigger than us, therefore no matter how hard you attempt to scare our fans, you won't be able to stop it. It's about letting folks know that there are always other options." A younger member of the Legion came forward. He indicated a restored Harley as such bike. "Who was the worker?" "It's Mrs. Chen's bike," Amy said with pride. "She is a widow of a veteran. It was fixed for her by Dad and Mr. Viper. Would you like to view the before photos?" As Amy excitedly showed the Legion members their project images, the tension started to ease. Pat saw Rage's face change from one of rage to one of perplexity to one of almost interest. Pat said to him, "Your choice. You can either stay and discover why these individuals selected a different path to strength, or you can depart as adversaries." 3 Legion members had registered for classes the following day by dusk. Rage's core group had fled, but his final threat lacked conviction. Instead of using force or threats, the community had united in a show of what true strength could do. What actually stopped them, do you know? Later, when serving coffee to the cleanup staff, Martha inquired. "We weren't the ones confronting them. They were observing their potential." When Pat arrived at the Veterans Center the morning following the Steel Legion confrontation, he was met by an unexpected sight. In the parking area, 3 Legion members were standing by, their bikes silently positioned far from the entrance. They were no longer wearing patches, and their posture seemed unsure rather than menacing. The youngest one came forward. "Ma'am. We have spent the entire night conversing. We weren't prepared for what we saw yesterday. Is it still possible to enroll in the maintenance course?" With Amy by his side organizing the sign-up forms, James was already inside getting ready for the lessons of the day. He nodded slowly after pausing to watch the former Legion members enter. "Take a pair of coveralls from the locker room and begin today's electrical systems." The Steel Legion members' metamorphosis served as a potent illustration of the program's influence. 7 more joined before the end of the week, each contributing their own set of abilities and life experiences. The software was changing, becoming more resilient in the face of the very obstacle that had threatened to bring it to ruin. Pointing to her computer screen, Maria invited Pat into her office and said, "You must see this." Something unexpected had been triggered by local news coverage of the Steel Legion tragedy. Calls were coming in from nearby counties' veterans centers inquiring about the implementation of comparable programs. Maria clarified that it's no longer only about repairing motorcycles. They are observing how this strategy fosters purpose and restores confidence. This morning, the mayor's office called. They intend to hold an official ceremony of recognition. Pat gave a headshake. "Ceremonies are not necessary for us. We require additional room and tools. Our resources are not keeping up with the program's growth." Martha rushed in with a pile of papers, as though to allay her worries. "The events at the diner will astound you. A fundraiser is being planned by local companies. The bank, Miller's Auto Parts, and Thompson's Hardware are all on board. Operation Restoration is the name given to it. The response from the community was tremendous. The Veterans Center changed during the course of the following several days. The workshop was expanded with the help of labor and materials given by local construction companies. Expertise from retired mechanics was provided. A collaboration program was suggested by the vocational section of the high school. James had shown himself to be a born leader. His previous role as Wolf now has a new function. He placed drawings on Pat's desk one morning and said, "We're planning something big. Not only motorcycles, but a community exhibition. We wish to demonstrate the full capabilities of this program." Amy, who had made herself the coordinator of the event, was giddy with anticipation. She declared it to be Strength Through Service Day. It was recommended by the former Legion members. They claimed they didn't realize it was what they were searching for all along. The organization of the showcase demonstrated the extent of the program's existing community integration. Claire's Corner Diner and other local eateries would supply the meals. Alongside seasoned mentors, the vocational students would showcase their abilities. Even the police force, who had previously been reluctant to collaborate with ex-gang members, had agreed to take part. "Take a look at this." During a planning meeting, Viper cried out and held up his phone to Pat. Inquiries about how to launch comparable initiatives in their localities were coming in from other motorcycle clubs throughout the state. Martha remarked as she served coffee to the planning group, "It's like watching a ripple turn into a wave. And to think that it all began when you confronted bullies in my cafe." Pat observed James instructing one of the ex-Legion members how to help troublesome teenagers. She saw the same change in the young man's face that she had seen in so many others. When they realized that their might could create rather than destroy. What actually altered them, do you know? Quietly, she asked Martha. "I wasn't the one confronting them. It was demonstrating to them their values." The program itself was unexpectedly impacted by the showcase preparation. Veterans who had been reluctant to assume leadership positions volunteered. Former rivals collaborated, putting their previous disputes aside in pursuit of their common goal. The program's teenagers were proud to share their knowledge with their parents and teachers. Pat discovered Amy sitting by herself in the office one afternoon, surrounded by planning paperwork. Without raising her gaze, the child replied, "Dad says you're the reason he changed. However, I believe you simply revealed his true self beneath all the anger." Pat, who was sitting next to her, said that sometimes people lose sight of who they are. All they require is a reminder. When the mayor's office contacted again, they weren't merely discussing a ceremony. In order to formally include the program in the city's veteran services, they wanted to talk about growing it. At the state level, the success was garnering attention. Maria noted, looking over the expanding list of attendees, "We're going to need more help. More teachers, more mentors." Pat pointed to the bustling workshop where a community had found its own strength, where veterans had found new meaning in assisting others, and where erstwhile adversaries were now teaching one another. "All of the teachers we require are here. They simply were not yet aware that they were teachers." Pat watched the final lesson of the day from the doorway as the sun sank over the enlarged center. James was instructing a diverse collection of people, including kids, veterans, ex-gang members, and even a few police officers, in motorcycle repair. Only a few weeks ago, the sight would have been unthinkable. General Maxwell appeared next to her and remarked, "You've built something remarkable here." He had become a frequent visitor, eagerly following the program's progress. Pat reminded him, "We all built it. Every individual who made the decision to change, every company that provided assistance, and every veteran who discovered a new calling. This was constructed by them. I simply opened the door." However, Pat came to the realization that sometimes the most impactful thing one can do is to open doors as she observed Amy happily leading a tour group around the building. They were no longer only repairing motorcycles. They were mending the strained ties that had caused division in their community. A surge of activity during the week leading up to the community showcase turned the Veterans Center into a bustling hub of activity. The parking lot was lined with news vans. They have satellite dishes that resemble mechanical trees that reach the sky. A tiny town community, former gang members, and veterans formed an odd friendship, and the tale was picked up by a large network. As Pat oversaw the installation of new workstations, a reporter named Ms. Mason came up to her. "The country has taken notice of your program. How can you transform ex-gang members into influential members of the community?" Pat took a moment to think about the question while working. No secret exists. These people and men were always capable of being leaders. They simply needed to be strong in a different way. The journalist continued. However, the change is striking. In 3 states, the Steel Legion was one of the most infamous motorcycle gangs. And now their members are instructing troublesome teenagers in motorcycle maintenance. A booming voice interrupted Pat before he could reply. "Allow me to introduce you to Remarkable." It was the former Steel Legion leader who had threatened them only weeks prior, Rage, now recognized by his true name, Marcus. He had come early in the morning. A Veterans Restoration Program badge takes the place of his gang patch. Marcus continued, facing the camera, "I thought for 10 years that being strong meant making people fear you. Real strength, as demonstrated by Ms. Mason and this program, is the ability to use your influence to uplift others. Not only is that amazing, it's revolutionary." James was presiding over a showcase planning meeting within the enlarged workshop. Amy is taking thorough notes next to him. Every interaction showed how their relationship had changed. Together, the father and daughter are restoring more than just motorcycles. With a glance at her clipboard, Amy declared, "We have 15 restored bikes to unveil. Each one has a distinct tale. The Thompson child's father's motorcycle prior to his deployment, Mrs. Chen's husband's motorcycle, and even the vintage police bike we restored for the museum. Additionally, every restoration crew is diverse." James proudly added. Teenagers working with retired mechanics, veterans interacting with former Legion members. "We want to highlight that. How collaboration transforms everything." There were difficulties in the preparation. Rumors were being spread by a few ardent Legion members who wanted to undermine the program. They specifically targeted James, attempting to discredit his new function by bringing up his previous role as Wolf. One evening, Pat discovered him gazing at his old Shadow Warriors cut, which he had preserved as a memento. "Are you unsure of yourself?" Quietly, she asked. "Without question," James answered, neatly folding the leather vest. Recalling. "To appreciate who I'm becoming, I must remember who I was." The journey from fear to service is what Amy asked if she might display in the presentation. Another surprise arrived the following morning. A team of veterans had come from a nearby state to learn how to set up comparable initiatives in their own areas. They marveled at how ex-gang members and police officers collaborated to instruct kids in life skills and motorcycle maintenance. Viper showed them how to rebuild a carburetor and stressed that the bike is only the first step. It provides us with a point of agreement and a tangible project to collaborate on. But in reality, we're re-establishing community, purpose, and trust. Martha had established a makeshift cafe in the middle, where she served coffee and her renowned apple pie to keep everyone energized. "What is it about this that I adore?" As she observed the activity, she spoke to Pat. Everyone who enters through that door joins something greater than themselves." Unexpected skills were discovered during the presentation preparations. A former Legion member, who is currently rehearsing his presentation on the program's impact, turned out to be a talented public speaker. Amy was able to organize the increasingly complicated event calendar with the help of one of the problematic kids who had a natural knack for it. Maria noted, looking at the expanding list of guests, "We're going to need a bigger space." Local companies had turned into fervent backers, providing resources as well as hands-on involvement. It was an official city event, according to the mayor's office. As Pat saw a group of veterans instruct inexperienced riders in motorcycle safety, he retorted, "It's not just about space. It's about making space for individuals to realize their own potential. Martha was having coffee with Pat in her usual booth at Claire's Corner Diner as the day came to an end. She could see the Veterans Center through the window, now lit by makeshift lights while crews toiled into the night. "Are you aware of what I discovered today?" As they refilled their mugs, Martha inquired. Marcus, the former head of the Legion, was interviewed by one of those news crews. "Do you know what he said?" "He claimed that entering our program required acknowledging that there was a better way to life, which was more difficult than any battle he had ever faced." Pat nodded, fully comprehending. "Our internal conflicts are always the most difficult." Amy was giving a tour to another group of guests outside, her voice booming with newly discovered self-assurance. From the doorway of the workshop, James observed, his expression displaying a mixture of awe at their collective progress and a father's pride. Martha, observing the last preparations, said, "Tomorrow is going to change everything. There is no turning back once people realize what is possible here." Pat grinned as he recalled the initial altercation that had begun it all in the diner. "We don't intend to return," she stated. "We're demonstrating how to proceed." The roar of motorcyclists ushered in dawn across Mill Creek. They were veterans, ex-gang members, local sympathizers, and interested bystanders who came from all areas. The Veterans Center parking lot, which had only been enlarged a few weeks prior, was already getting full. As hundreds of cars and bikes looked for parking spots, local police struggled to control traffic. Pat watched from the center's entrance as Amy led volunteers with the assurance of an experienced event planner. The 12-year-old had a meticulous calendar that would rival military operations, along with color-coded badges for various events. Amy checked her clipboard and reported that everything was ready. "The demonstration areas are ready, Mrs. Chen is positioned with her refurbished bike for the opening ceremony, and Dad is finishing up the last inspection of the display motorcycles." The exhibition had expanded well beyond what they had originally envisioned. An entire community event was created from what began as a straightforward display of their motorbike restoration program. Veterans organizations provided support services, local businesses had put up booths, and the motorcyclists who had undergone transformation were eager to tell their story. James, sporting a brand new leather vest with the Veterans Restoration Program logo printed on the back, came over. "You must see this," he remarked, guiding Pat to the entrance of the parking lot. Former Steel Legion members from other states were riding motorbikes in a line down the street, each one carrying a rider who had heard about the program and was interested in finding out more. Marcus added, "They're joining us from as far away as Texas." Among the motorcycling community, word got out. The Mill Creek Miracle is the story of how one little town transformed its most dangerous residents into its most dependable guardians. At 10, the formal ceremony got underway. Mayor Wilson's voice reverberated throughout the crowded lot as he stood in front of the assembled audience. Motorcycle gangs were considered a menace in this community a few months ago. "We made national headlines today for demonstrating how communities may resolve disputes amicably." Pat saw Martha, exactly as she had that first night in the diner, pushing her coffee cart through the crowd while the mayor talked. She smiled at the familiar gesture in the middle of all the changes. Mrs. Chen started her late husband's rebuilt motorcycle to start the first demonstration. As she described the program's significance to her, the old widow's voice trembled with emotion. She said they did more than just mend his bike. They enabled me to preserve his memories. I now instruct other widows and spouses of military personnel. Together, we recover. During the day, similar tales surfaced. Instead of joining a gang, a teenage guy showed off the electrical repair abilities he had mastered. A clean and sober former Legion member demonstrated how his work with veterans had given him meaning. Previously pursuing these bikers, police officers now worked side by side with them, instructing children in motorcycle safety. Despite the tremendous media focus, Pat saw something intriguing. It wasn't simply the event that the reporters were covering. They were integrating with it. One cameraman put down his gear so Viper could teach him the fundamentals of maintenance. James got into a heated discussion about veteran support programs with a national TV anchor. A reporter named Ms. Mason came up to Pat. "People are referring to your program as a model for community transformation. What's your secret?" Amy interrupted Pat before he could respond. "It's not a secret," she asserted. "According to my dad, despite all of the anger, Ms. Mason simply revealed their true selves. She assisted them in discovering their true strength." There was an unexpected moment in the afternoon. General Maxwell stood up and spoke to the assembly. "This initiative has been extensively monitored by the Department of Veterans Affairs. There is more going on in Mill Creek than just motorcycle repair. It's about changing our perspective on communal healing." Pat watched James instruct a group of youths, some of whom had previously dreaded him as Wolf, as he spoke. Beside him, his daughter assisted in demonstrating how to use the tools properly. Their mutual goal of assisting others helped to mend their relationship. Standing next to Pat, Maria noted that the bikes aren't the true showcase. People are the problem. Take a look at how well they currently collaborate. Former adversaries are educating, supporting, and creating something new together. When other ex-gang members from different clubs took the stage, the event reached its most dramatic climax. They told their transformational stories one by one. Last to speak was Marcus, the once dreaded Legion captain. "People feared us, so we thought we were strong," he added, his voice echoing through the quiet audience. "However, true strength? This is where we discovered true strength. Restoring a soldier widow's ability to ride her husband's bike is the goal. It teaches them that there is a better way than the one we choose. It involves owning up to our mistakes and making the decision to improve." Pat returned to her regular booth at Claire's Corner Diner as the sun started to drop. She could see through the window that the exhibit was still operating, with strings of lights shining on the rebuilt motorcycles, giving them the appearance of chrome stars. "What actually changed, do you know?" Martha sat into the booth with a fresh cup of coffee and inquired. "It's not limited to the community, veterans, or even motorcyclists. We now perceive strength in this way. You demonstrated to us that it is not about who can scare the most people. Who can assist the greatest number of individuals is the key." Amy led another tour group, and Pat observed as she spoke clearly and confidently about how working on motorcycles had helped her and her father's relationship get better. James trailed after, his pride showing at every turn. "It's not just today," Pat said as she sipped her coffee. "It's demonstrating to others what may happen when we cease battling one another and begin fighting for one another." Motorbikes kept coming in outside under the twilight sky. More communities seeking knowledge, more veterans seeking meaning, and more ex-gang members seeking change. The repercussions of that initial altercation in the cafe were evolving into transformative waves that extended well beyond the boundaries of Mill Creek. Pat's office phone kept ringing the week following the showcase. Veterans facilities across were interested in learning how to duplicate their achievements. Motorcycle organizations inquired about transformation programs from as far away as California. Their community integration concept even piqued the interest of police departments. After placing a pile of documents on Pat's desk, Maria declared, "We have requests from 23 states. 3 significant veteran organizations are also interested in collaborating with us." The office of the governor phoned. Their goal is to make this a statewide effort. Pat watched James conduct a morning maintenance lesson from her office window. With tourists from different cities watching their techniques, the workshop was busier than ever. "We must exercise caution," she remarked. "Since we are aware of each person's unique story, this works because it is personal. In our haste to grow, we cannot lose that." Amy rushed in with a tablet in place of her clipboard. "I must show you this, Ms. Mason. Do you recall the Legion members from Texas who attended the showcase? They have launched their own restoration initiative. It's known as Mill Creek South." Both pride and concern were evoked by the news. Pat has witnessed how bureaucracy may smother good intentions and cause initiatives to lose their character when they expand too quickly. But before she could express her worries, Martha showed there with coffee in her customary impeccable timing. Pulling up a chair, Martha continued, "I have something you should see. Do you recall the young Legion member who was furious during the showcase? He and his mother just entered the diner. It's their first conversation in years. Together, they were examining motorbike repair manuals. Outside, Marcus was demonstrating how to manage a youth mentorship program to a group of ex-gang members from a different state. He spoke loudly through the window. He was saying, 'It's not about the motorcycles. The bikes are only a temporary solution. In reality, we're teaching children how to trust and be a part of something positive.'" With his hands still greasy from the morning lesson, James went into Pat's office. He smiled as he continued, "We have a situation. Do you recall our concerns about having enough teachers to accommodate all of the newcomers? The first group that we educated is prepared to instruct. My daughter is currently enrolled in her own junior mechanics course. Something unforeseen had been triggered by the Shadow Warriors and Legion members. Metamorphosis. They were being approached willingly by other motorcycle clubs who wanted to know how they could improve their own organizations. At least in their region of the world, the outlaw biker culture was changing. Viper yelled, "Look at this," and held up his phone. A video showing ex-gang members assisting a veteran in rebuilding his late son's motorcycle was going viral, but it was not about fighting or bloodshed. Similar stories from all throughout the nation were posted in the comment area. Pat observed Amy instructing a group of young girls in the fundamentals of motorcycle maintenance. By launching a future mechanics program, the 12-year-old inspired other children to view the garage as a space for development and healing. What's actually spreading, do you know? Later, Amy joined Pat at her regular diner booth and inquired. The motorcycle program isn't the only one. It's the notion that individuals are malleable and that there's always time to improve. The growth presented new difficulties. Working with ex-gang members was viewed with skepticism by several veteran organizations. It was necessary to persuade certain law enforcement agencies. However, it was difficult to dispute the outcomes. Crime rates are declining. Suicide rates among veterans are declining. Strengthening of ties throughout the community. Maria reported that we received another call from General Maxwell. The VA wants to research our approach and use it as a template for rehabilitating veterans across the country. However, they wish to establish protocols and standardize everything. Pat gave a headshake. We keep our hearts intact, so let them study us. Manuals don't contain the protocols. They are found in the way we handle every individual who enters the building. There was a unique moment in the evening. A surprise was planned by a group of veterans who had been dubious about the initiative at first. For Pat, they had repaired a motorcycle. It was the exact same bike that she had learned to ride in Vietnam, and not just any bike. We discovered it in fragments, James said, revealing the shining device. Each individual who has benefited from this initiative made a contribution to the restoration. The children even contributed to its polish. Pat noticed more than just metal and mechanics as she brushed her touch over the chrome of the repaired bike. She saw the hundreds of hands that had contributed to its reconstruction, each one symbolizing a life that their program had impacted. Do you realize what this is? Martha inquired as she observed the action. It's evidence that one individual standing out for what's right can transform an entire way of thinking, not just a town. Pat could see the Veterans Center lighting up for evening sessions through the window of the cafe. Working side by side, former adversaries imparted their knowledge of service and power to others. As the best possible daughter of her father, Amy moved among them, assisting others in finding the light they had discovered. Pat noted that the presentation never truly ended. We continue to demonstrate what is feasible, but on a bigger scale. More motorcycles pulled up outside, this time with the steady intent of people who came to grow, learn, and change, rather than the menacing rumbling of their past. Mill Creek was no longer afraid of the sound. Rather, it held the possibility of change. One story at a time, one bike, one person. A letter sparked the crisis. Standardize or lose support by using official VA letterhead, pages of regulations, and a clear message. Pat was in her office going over criteria that threatened to take away all of the unique features of their program. According to Maria, who emphasized important points, they want us to do away with the personal mentorship approach. There will be no more unstructured learning sessions, only standardized classes, and qualified teachers. What about the ex-gang members? Before they could even enter the building, they would have to clear federal background checks. As Amy led her youth group through their morning routine, James watched from the window. My prior record would prevent me from working with veterans, therefore that would exclude half of our teachers, including me. Pat put the letter down and remarked, "They're completely missing the point. Because we meet individuals where they are rather than where a regulation dictates they should be, our program is successful." The maintenance lesson in the morning made clear what they stood to lose. Marcus was sharing his experience as a Legion leader with a group of veterans, which gave him a unique perspective on how to handle loneliness and rage. Alongside them, two teenagers from problematic homes learned more than simply mechanics. Viper yelled, "Look at this," and walked into Pat's office. He displayed a video from one of their sister programs in Texas on his phone. Former gang members were educating at-risk adolescents about motorcycle safety while connecting with them via their personal transformational tales. Under these new regulations, all of that would have to end, Maria muttered. No more unofficial mentorship, no more personal tales. Everything would have to adhere to a set curriculum. Martha showed up with coffee and worry. At the diner, word is getting out. People are concerned. Veterans and their families' lives were spared by this initiative. Do you recall Tommy? That young person on the verge of juvenile detention? Rather from joining gangs, he is now educating other children about motors. There was increasing pressure to fit in. The VA had given them a 30-day window to comply or risk losing their official accreditation as a veteran program. The problem wasn't the money. Although local companies had already promised to support them, their capacity to assist veterans across the country would be harmed by the lack of formal status. Amy's cheeks flushed with resolve as she bounded inside the office. She placed papers on Pat's desk and declared, "I think I have an idea. What if we made two different tracks? One that satisfies all of their certification standards and another that wins our hearts." As Amy described her vision, the adults gathered around her. The formal program, which offers recognized training and scheduled classes, would meet VA standards. However, their first model would persist alongside it. Community healing, transformation stories, and one-on-one mentoring. With comprehension emerging in his eyes, James remarked, "It's like having two engines on the same bike. While the other keeps us loyal to who we are, the first keeps us formally going forward." Pat looked over Amy's suggestion. The girl had sketched out how they could meet bureaucratic standards without sacrificing their essence. For someone so young, that was profound reasoning. She had, however, seen her father change from a feared gang leader to a well-respected community mentor. Marcus joined the conversation by saying, "There's something else. The other clubs, those attempting to change, are prepared to support us. We will demonstrate the worth of transformation if the VA refuses to acknowledge it." Pat convened a community gathering at Claire's Corner Diner that afternoon. It was crowded. Families, local business owners, veterans, and ex-gang members are all worried about protecting what they have created. Pat told the assembled gathering, "They want us to choose between official recognition and our true mission. But Amy has showed us that we don't have to make a decision. Both are possible for us." The reaction from the community was strong and swift. Local companies promised more assistance. The police department promised to formally certify its former gang member teachers as security personnel. The principal of the high school suggested incorporating their youth program into the formal curriculum. You know what's important?" Martha questioned as she made her way through the coffee-drinking mob. "The certificates on the wall aren't the problem. It's the way people's hearts have changed. That cannot be measured by any regulation." With his voice echoing throughout the diner, James Clare to his feet. "When I was Wolf, I believed that intimidating others was a sign of strength. It comes from helping others trust you, this program taught me. That lesson cannot be destroyed by paperwork." The community itself came up with the solution. They would design an official training curriculum that met VA standards. However, it would just be a single component of a bigger whole. The core of their work, the interpersonal relationships, the stories of transformation, and the community's healing, would not alter. Amy told a local reporter, "Think of it like the bikes we restore. The machine's soul never dies, even though you occasionally need new parts to keep it operating. The same is true of our program." From her normal booth, Pat saw the folks leaving the meeting with newfound purpose as the sun sank over Mill Creek. She could see through the glass that the Veterans Center was still occupied with evening classes, both official and informal, controlled and private, all of them cooperating. "Do you know what this actually demonstrated to us?" Martha slid into the booth and asked. "That this program's story, people, and heart are what make it strong, not its framework." A fresh batch of motorcycles pulled up outside. More lives prepared to change, more souls seeking transformation. Mill Creek was no longer alarmed by the sound of their engines. Rather, it had the assurance that the ability to change lives would continue to function regardless of obstacles. As Pat watched two quite different events play out, the Veterans Center's extended parking lot was covered in lengthy shadows from the morning sun. On the one hand, the official VA-approved course with a standardized curriculum and licensed teachers was about to begin. Marcus, on the other hand, was teaching a group of problematic teenagers the fundamentals of motorcycle maintenance while sharing his own transformation story. After looking over the week's data, Maria said, "It's actually working better than we expected. While our initial strategy continues to target those who require something more individualized, the official program provides certain individuals with the structure they require." Wiping grease from his hands, James walked over. "However, we have a situation. Just arrived is a group of Vietnam veterans. They claim they won't learn from ex-offenders and are opposed to the entire concept." Pat understood the challenge and nodded. "Now, where are they? Choosing to stay or give us a chance in the parking lot?" Pat discovered the bunch gathered around their motorcycles, their faces doubtful, their posture defensive. She recognized their expression. It was a mixture of pride and pain from bearing conflict for too long, and she had worn it herself once. "Gentlemen," she yelled, walking toward them. "There's fresh coffee inside if you want to chat." One of them moved forward, his leather vest adorned with patches from his Vietnam service. "Respectfully, ma'am, we have heard of this location. Combining ex-gang members with veterans? It is incorrect. I'll tell you what's wrong." Pat answered, the weight of common experience in her voice. "How many of our brothers and sisters are lost because they are unable to make their way home from combat is wrong. It's wrong to believe that only flawless individuals can mend damaged ones." Amy showed up beside Pat with a clipboard. "Do you want to view our success rates? In just 3 months, we have assisted more veterans than the previous programs did in a full year." The young girl's professional manner astonished the veterans, who exchanged glances. Pat pressed the advantage after noticing a small softening of their position. "Come in," she said. "Nothing requires you to join. Simply observe what is taking place here." The 2-track system was operating at full capacity inside. A certified motorcycle safety course was being conducted by the official class. A veteran widow was assisting a former Legion member in rebuilding her late husband's motorcycle in the nearby bay. "You see the official class being taught by that man?" Pat indicated a qualified teacher. "He refused to leave his house 3 months ago. He was able to establish himself thanks to the unofficial program. Additionally, he is now eligible to instruct the VA-approved course. One of the doubtful veterans observed James instructing a group of teenagers on electrical systems. "Isn't that the one they named Wolf? The leader of the gang?" Amy clarified that she was a former gang boss. Her tone was stern but polite. "He is now among our greatest mentors. Are you interested in the success percentages of our kids' programs?" The course of the morning proved the efficacy of their two strategies. The Vietnam veterans watched both tracks, observing how each met distinct requirements while pursuing the same objective. "What convinced me, you know?" Martha inquired later while preparing coffee for Pat and the veterans who had chosen to remain and saw how they deal with the difficult cases, those that don't fall into neat categories or adhere to established protocols. Just as expected, there was a ruckus coming from the workshop. An unexpected sound was causing a flashback for a young veteran. However, Marcus and James were there before anybody could respond, and their personal trauma experiences enabled them to empathize with the individual who was having difficulties. Pat told the veterans who were watching, "That's what we mean by keeping our heart. Not all healing is done according to a manual." Over the course of the day, the doubting veterans gradually changed. They saw old rivals working together, troubled teenagers finding meaning in service, and damaged bikes and damaged people being fixed together. The lead veteran said, "I think I get it now." Lastly, observing Amy teach a group of young girls the fundamentals of tool safety. This goes beyond simply repairing motorcycles. Pat concurred that it never was. The bikes serve only as a means of connecting with those who have lost their sense of belonging, trust, and healing. By nightfall, the Vietnam veterans had turned into unanticipated supporters of the initiative. They observed how the two-track system permitted both formal acknowledgement and individual touch, structure, and flexibility. "What makes this work, you know?" Joining Pat at her regular diner booth, James inquired. "Erasing the past is not our goal. It is being used to create a better future." The Veterans Center was still open in the evening, as they could see through the glass. The formal class was coming to an end. All appropriate steps were taken, and documentation was filed. However, the core of their program continued to beat next door. Former gang members are taught by veterans, and disturbed youth are taught from lives that have been changed. One tale at a time, the community is restorative. As she slid into the seat with her ubiquitous iPad, Amy declared that tomorrow will be an interesting day. The Vietnam veterans wished to establish a mentorship program for senior veterans who are facing prolonged isolation. Pat grinned as additional motorcyclists showed up, some for their original strategy and some for the official program, all of them carrying individuals looking for more than just mechanical expertise. Martha brought new coffee and remarked, "You see, some people require structure in addition to certificates. Others require knowledge and stories. We're providing both of them." The nighttime air was filled with the sound of motorcycles, but this time it carried a new message. The focus had shifted from transformation alone. The goal was to determine the best route for each person's return trip. That morning, there was an unusual buzz of activity at the Veterans Center. Once so reclusive that he hadn't left his home in 2 years, a retired Marine colonel was set to finish both of their program's courses. In the company of the improbable family that had guided him back, he stood with pride next to his rebuilt motorcycle. As TV cameras caught the action, Pat urged them to tell them how it began. The colonel explained, "I came for the official VA program," his voice no longer trembling. "Thought it was structured and safe. Then I noticed what was going on in the opposite bay. I witnessed veterans aiding one another in their recovery and these ex-gang members instructing children. I recognized then that I needed both." With the dual system, the colonel's success was everything they had hoped for. The official track had given him accredited training, and their original method had helped him heal personally. More significantly, though, he would serve as a link between other veteran organizations, assisting others in seeing the merits of both routes. James walked over to Pat, his face worried. Something is developing between us. Do you recall last week's doubtful Vietnam veterans? They've returned with buddies, a complete chapter of seasoned motorcyclists who are upset about hanging out with ex-gang members. Pat discovered the group in the parking lot with their motorcycles parked in a semicircle and in a combative position. Charlie, a distinguished veteran and their commander, took the lead. He said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This isn't right. For this country, we fought. The criminals you're collaborating with battled against all of our values." Amy came out of the center with a tablet before Pat could reply. "In fact, sir," she said in a youthful, assured voice. "Are you interested in our statistics? Children of veterans make up 70% of the former gang members in our program. In their search for the fraternity their elders spoke of, they became lost." The statement resonated. Charlie's combative posture wavered a little. "Young lady, what are you trying to say? My point is that they might not be all that different from the veterans you are attempting to assist. They simply looked for belonging in the wrong place." Both program tracks continued inside the center. While Marcus worked with a group of youngsters next door, sharing his transformational tale and teaching them about motorcycle repair, the official class went through their certified training. James whispered to Charlie's group, "Watch this. Look at the child in the corner. He was on his way to prison 3 months ago. He is currently assisting injured veterans with bike restoration. Don't tell me that's worthless." As the veteran bikers watched both sides of the program in operation, the tension started to change. They observed a young veteran dealing with PTSD being mentored by the colonel, who is now certified in both tracks. They observed erstwhile adversaries cooperating. Their old quarrels became common knowledge. "Do you know what changed me the most?" Marcus inquired, adding to the conversation. "Although it wasn't the official program, I gained the necessary abilities from it. It was realizing that rather than destroying, my strength could develop. I learned that from these veterans." Martha came from the diner with her famous apple pie and coffee. Believed that everyone needed a vacation. She said she was going to a folding table to set up. There's nothing like fresh pie and hot coffee to settle disputes. Something unexpected occurred as the veterans and ex-gang members gathered around Martha's makeshift cafe. Narratives started to flow. Veterans discussing their difficulties in determining their post-service purpose. Former gang members discussing their quest for acceptance. Everyone can identify aspects of themselves in the experiences of others. "Can you see what's going on?" Quietly, Pat questioned Charlie. "For this reason, we require both strategies. They receive skills from the formal program, but they also receive healing from this." One of Charlie's men's recognition of a young ex-gang member was the turning point. Sarah's boy, Tommy. Startled, the young man looked up. "Did you know my mother? In Desert Storm, I served with her. She was an outstanding medic." The voice of the veteran grew softer. "Heard that once she died, things were difficult." Tommy gave a nod. "I got into the gang that way. Was trying to find out what Mom used to discuss. The fraternity. The goal. Instead, I found it here. It just took a long time to arrive." The dynamic had changed entirely by the afternoon. Charlie's squad gave it their all. While some participated in the official certification classes, others used the informal program to exchange skills and tales. There was more to the dual system than merely meeting disparate demands. It was connecting disparate realms. "Do you realize what you've actually created here?" Later at the diner, Charlie told Pat. "It's more than just a program for veterans. The program is more than just reformation. People go there to recollect who they were supposed to be." Through the window, they could see Amy spearheading a brand new project, a mentoring program for at-risk youngsters run by repentant gang members and veteran bikers. While the informal route allowed for the human relationships that enabled genuine transformation, the official track offered the certification and structure. Pat occasionally thought about the strange family they had formed. Those who used to be on opposing sides build the strongest bridges. As more people arrived, the roar of motorcycles filled the air. Through the two routes they had established, they all found their way home, some for official training, some for personal rehabilitation. Ultimately, there was no need to choose between heart and structure. It was about being wise enough to see that both were required for real change. For hours, Pat's desk held the unopened letter from Washington, D.C. An invitation to discuss their program at a National Veterans Conference was what Maria had already confirmed was inside. Policymakers searching for fresh approaches to long-standing issues had taken notice of their dual approach's success. Analyzing the invitation, Maria clarified, "They want all of us there. The veterans, you, James, and even the ex-gang members are curious about how this actually operates." Pat looked at the bustling factory outside her office window. James was instructing a mixed group that included both personal mentoring and certified training. In Mill Creek, it had become so commonplace to see former rivals cooperating that it was easy to forget how revolutionary it seemed to outsiders. Amy, Ms. Mason, rushed in as usual, tablet in hand. "In addition to the Young Leadership Summit I've been organizing, 5 other cities have gotten in touch with us about launching their own initiatives. Participants have signed up from 12 different states." Martha came with coffee and news from the diner before Pat could reply. "You won't believe the person who just entered. Do you recall that West Coast Steel Legion leader? The one who vowed to never change? His entire chapter is present because they want to learn how to change their club." The events of the morning exemplified what made their program unique. Veterans who followed the proper shadow completed accredited courses and earned VIA recognized certificates. In their initial session, Marcus told the recently arrived Legion members his story and demonstrated to them how service may lead to redemption. James led the Legion visitors through the facilities and added, "Watch this. Observe how both sides cooperate. They have stability from the structure, but they have purpose from the heart." The West Coast motorcyclists watched as a young veteran moved between programs with ease, attending formal certification training in the morning and then spending the afternoons teaching basic mechanics to troublesome teenagers. The change was seen in real time. Do you know what makes it so appealing? One of their most ardent fans, Charlie, questioned the guests. "The way the two tracks complement one another is more important than just the tracks themselves. While the informal program gives us soul, the official program provides us credibility." Amy had developed into a remarkable young leader, and Pat found herself observing her. With an insight beyond her years, the child had planned the next youth summit, making sure it included both official training and one-on-one mentoring. Amy told several curious parents, "We're calling it Rising Together." In addition to receiving maintenance training and official safety certifications, the children will hear transformational tales from individuals who have faced challenges and overcome them. There was an unexpected moment in the afternoon. Unannounced, a top VA official showed up to observe their dual approach in action. At Claire's Corner Diner, he discovered Pat where she always was. He sat down opposite her in the booth and said, "I'll be honest. I felt it was ridiculous when I first heard about this program, which had disturbed youths working with military officers and former gang members educating veterans." Through the window, however, they witnessed it in action as a team of veterans and ex-gang members collaborated to teach motorcycle safety to a mixed class of certified students and young people who were at danger. The common goal of assisting others made it difficult to distinguish between official and informal activities. "We're not only teaching people how to fix motorcycles," Pat clarified. "We are assisting them in reconstructing their life. That occasionally need organization. It requires heart sometimes. It usually requires both." Slowly, the VA official nodded. "At the conference, that is what we hope to highlight. This success story is no longer limited to Mill Creek. This has the potential to transform the way we help veterans across the country." When the sun sank over the center later that night, James discovered Pat still in the diner at her booth. "What makes this work, you know? He slid in opposite her and asked. The twin tracks aren't the only thing. We never forget where we began because of that. There is only one person in this diner who is prepared to recognize the positive aspects of people that everyone else has given up on. They may observe the development of their program's next generation through the window. Amy was in charge of a youth summit planning session with a variety of formal teachers and unofficial mentors in attendance. As they sat with Charlie's veteran group, the Steel Legion visitors broke down boundaries since they had similar goals and stories. Martha noted that she occasionally brought new coffee. The smallest locations are where the largest changes begin. Who would have imagined that all of this could result from a single altercation in a diner? Pat observed the arrival of several motorcycles. Some are for informal mentorship, while others are for the official program. All members of their expanding family. Mill Creek was no longer tense with the sound of engines. Rather, it held the promise of change, the potential for salvation, and the evidence that sometimes the best answers are found when structure and soul are combined. Are you prepared to travel to Washington? Observing the unopened mail, James inquired. Are you ready? As their improbable success story continued to develop, Pat responded. It's time to demonstrate to the world that healing occurs most effectively when we begin constructing bridges rather than taking sides. Unexpected tensions eclair in the week leading up to the Washington meeting. Pat was sitting in her office going over the most recent email that the conference organizers had sent. They aimed to simplify their presentation by reducing the tales of gang members who had changed and concentrating solely on the official program track. Maria remarked impatiently, they're trying to sanitize it. They want certification rates and success figures, but they want to ignore the guts of what makes things work. James worriedly stepped into his face. I just finished speaking with the conference committee over the phone. They are saying that I don't talk at all. Claim that the message might be complicated by my history. Pat got up and made her choice right away. Then none of us talk. We don't hide our tales, which is why this program works. They teach us. She could see Marcus instructing a group of veterans through the window. His own transformation from leader of a Steel Legion to esteemed mentor demonstrated precisely what the bureaucrats wished to conceal. Amy was giving a youth summit preparatory workshop nearby, skillfully fusing personal transformation stories with certified training. Amy cried out as she brought her tablet into the office, Ms. Mason. I believe I have a concept. What if we let the outcomes do the talking? I've been recording everything, the success rates, the changes, the effects on families, but I've also been recording the genuine tales, not just the numbers. The young woman displayed a presentation. She had been constructing. The official statistics were displayed. Every presentation was accompanied by a personal story, as the bureaucrats desired. Veterans are finding new routes, becoming mentors to troubled youngsters, and finding meaning in gangs. With success, they are unable to argue. Martha stated she arrived with coffee and her usual impeccable timing. And it's not simply the metrics that show our success. The lives have changed as a result. An unexpected ally arrived in the afternoon. The colonel, whose metamorphosis had proven the effectiveness of their two-pronged strategy, came bearing tidings. The motorcycle clubs for veterans are organizing. When they learned that Washington wanted to clean up the presentation, he made the announcement. They made the decision to arrive in force. There are hundreds of motorcycles with success stories on them. It will be impossible for them to ignore. Through the diner window, Pat observed their community getting ready for Washington. James assisted veterans and ex-gang members in expressing their experiences. The collaboration between the official track teachers and informal mentors demonstrated how the two methods complemented one another. Do you know what truly frightens them? Marcus joined Pat at her usual booth and inquired. We demonstrated that redemption is not a neatly packaged solution, which is why they are terrified. Sometimes the most helpful people are the ones they wish to hide. Amy had converted the main room of the center into a prep space. Pictures and stories on the walls. Each picture conveyed a piece of their narrative. The governmental accomplishments as well as the individual changes. The healing moments are close to the certified accomplishments. She showed Pat her most recent edition and said, "Look at this." The images were a sequence of before and after photos. As Wolf, James is currently educating veterans. Marcus, the Steel Legion's leader, is now a counselor to disturbed youth. The colonel, now in charge of community outreach, isolated himself in his house. Pat stated strongly that these are the stories they must see. Not just the statistics, but evidence that people can change if given the opportunity. Claire's Corner Diner served as a gathering place for the community that evening. The place was crowded with supporters, program participants, veterans, and ex-gang members getting ready for Washington. However, they were sharing their authentic stories rather than practicing sterile presentations. "Do you recall that first evening?" James questioned the assembled audience. "Ms. Mason didn't spot any gang members when she confronted us at this exact diner. She noticed individuals who were disoriented. That is what Washington must realize. Those that society abandons can sometimes be the ones who can guide others back." Motorbikes still came in through the window. More success stories, more lives changed, and more evidence that their two-pronged strategy was effective. The evening air was filled with the roar of engines, but this time the message was different. Individual atonement was no longer the only goal. It was intended to demonstrate to the world that healing occurs most effectively when the entire story, complicated parts and all, is accepted. Speaking to the packed diner, Pat stated, "They want us to fit their mold. However, our differences are what make us strong. True change occurs when we stop trying to make people fit the program and start making the program suit the people. This is demonstrated by every individual in this room and every tale they want us to keep hidden." Preparations went on as night descended over Mill Creek. As Amy prepared on her presentation, she meticulously combined personal stories with official success rates. By focusing on the structure that enabled them to accomplish as well as the heart that inspired them to do so, James and Marcus assisted others in practicing telling their tales. "What exactly are we bringing to Washington, you know?" Martha inquired as she gave the planning group coffee late at night. "We're delivering evidence that the best answers can occasionally be found in unexpected places. And that Martha cannot be altered by sanitization." Hundreds of motorbikes gathered in the parking area of the Veterans Center as dawn dawned over Mill Creek. What began as a straightforward talk at a conference in Washington has grown into a movement. Veterans and ex-gang members from all over the nation had come to support their program, which changed lives. According to Maria, who was checking her phone for updates, the convoy is 3 miles long. 12 states worth of motorcycle clubs are coming to demonstrate the true significance of this program. As James assisted Pat in loading their presentation materials into backup trucks, Pat observed. His hands trembled a little. The ex-gang boss, who had endured innumerable threats, is now apprehensive about interacting with bureaucrats. Second-guessing herself, she joined him in asking. As he secured a box containing Amy's meticulously prepared documents, he responded, "Not about the program. I'm just curious if they'll be able to look past who I was and see who we've grown into." As usual, Amy hurried over, tablet in hand. "You must see this, Dad. At every major cross shadows, motorcycle clubs are joining the convoy, according to traffic cameras. The Redemption Ride to Washington is the name given to it." The departure from Mill Creek turned out to be an unexpected event. Residents of the town lined the streets, holding signs endorsing their program and waving flags. Banners had been displayed by local businesses. "Congratulations to Mill Creek, the place where change occurs, and best of luck in Washington. Give them a glimpse of what true change looks like." Martha watched the enormous convoy form outside the diner, her eyes welling with tears. "To think it all began here," she remarked. Bidding Pat farewell with a hug. "Take a glimpse at what true healing looks like for those bureaucrats. The trip to Washington became evidence of the success of their program. More motorcyclists joined them at each stop. Families that had been rebuilt, veterans who had completed their program, and ex-gang members who had found new meaning all came together to support the T. Martha they had learned in Mill Creek. During a rest stop, Marcus said, "Look at this," and held up his phone to Pat. The progress of the convoy was being covered by news channels. A nation is transformed by transformed lives. One headline said, "Milk Creek Program leads motorcycle march to Washington." Pat's backup vehicle pulled beside the colonel who was riding close to the front of the convoy. "I just received word from my DC contacts. The officials are in a panic. They were not prepared for this level of assistance. A straightforward presentation on certification rates was what they were looking for. They're getting a movement instead." The effect of their convoy became evident as they got closer to Washington. As people filmed the never-ending flow of motorcycles, traffic stopped. Groups of veterans gathered over flagged passes. They were even joined by police escorts. Numerous policemen have witnessed the impact of the program in their local areas. On their last stop before the city, Amy stated, "Ms. Mason, the presentation tomorrow has been on my mind. Both sides must be seen. The personal narrative and the formal triumph. To demonstrate how they complement one another, I have revised the slides." Amy's work was reviewed by Pat. Ideally balanced between the personal changes they couldn't ignore and the certified accomplishments they wished to emphasize. The girl had encapsulated the unique qualities of their curriculum. The city of Washington would never forget the scene generated by the arrival. The national monuments were thundered by hundreds of motorcyclists. Every facet of the program's accomplishment is represented by their riders. One group was commanded by Marcus, and another by James. Each person uses their own presence to tell a portion of their narrative. The conference organizers were obviously overwhelmed by the number of attendees and hurried to meet them at the hotel. One said, "This isn't what we expected," observing as the parking area grew in number of motorcyclists. Pat calmly said, "That's precisely the point. Expectations are rarely met by actual change." An unplanned meeting took place in the hotel's conference room that evening. As they prepared for tomorrow's presentation, veterans and ex-gang members told their stories. Each story emphasized how their accomplishment was made possible by their dual strategy, official certification, and personal growth. What frightens them the most? James joined Pat by the window and inquired. "It's not our metrics or our strategies. In ways their manuals never envisioned, we are demonstrating that change is possible." They could see the never-ending line of motorcycles through the window, each one symbolizing a life that had been changed. From Mill Creek to the nation's capital, the sound of motors had followed them, bringing with it a message that no bureaucrat could ignore. Tomorrow, Pat informed the assembled audience. "We will provide them with the certification rates and information they want. However, we will also demonstrate something more significant to them. We'll demonstrate to them what happens when you view individuals as stories that need to be transformed rather than as problems that need to be solved." Preparations went on as night fell over Washington. Amy carefully balanced personal stories with official success rates as she polished her presentation. As a testimonial to the effectiveness of their program, James rehearsed his speech and shared his journey from wolf to mentor. "What did we actually bring to Washington, you know?" Marcus inquired as more fans showed up. "They will have to make a decision tomorrow, but we brought evidence that sometimes the best answers come from the most unlikely places." Do they prefer initiatives that merely appear nice on paper or ones that have a real impact on people's lives? Pat examined the crowded meeting room, which hummed with anxiety. The front rows were taken by government officials in suits, while the remainder of the room was full by hundreds of veterans, ex-gang members, and program supporters. More supporters arrived outside, adding to the rumble of motorcycles. "The schedule has been altered," Maria said hastily. "They wish to have the duration of our presentation. Let's say they have to keep the conference format." Pat was about to reply when a senior VA official came up to the platform. We will only be concentrating on the certified training components of the Mill Creek curriculum due to time constraints. Speakers are asked to follow established procedures and success indicators. Pat maintained his composure while the audience shifted nervously. Months before, her chances had been worse in that diner. Squeezing her hand, Amy moved forward, iPad in hand. The little girl's voice did, in fact, reverberate across the hall. Sir. I've produced a presentation that demonstrates the inseparability of our official stats and human impact. Are you interested in our success rates? Amy started without waiting for approval. The official figures they requested, certification rates, job placements, and recuperation statistics were displayed on her slides. However, she presented the faces and narratives that provided context for each measure. She pointed to a before and after photo and stated, "This is Tom. According to your statistics, he completed his certification successfully and is listed as participant 247. However, our program recognizes him as a veteran who rediscovers his purpose by instructing others. Both are important. Both are relevant." As Amy went on, the officials shuffled uneasily. Conviction permeated her youthful voice. "You were curious about how we keep our success rate at 92%. The reason is because we do more than merely certify skills. We reconstruct life. In your reports, each number represents a person with a backstory." The next to take the stage was James, whose presence demanded respect. Wolf, the dreaded gang boss, was nowhere to be seen. A mentor, a father, and a community leader took his place. He started 3 months ago. When a group of staunch members of the Steel Legion showed up at our facility, they thought we had softened. 12 of them have earned certification as instructors in your official program today. Are you curious as to why? Because we demonstrated to them that true strength is transformation rather than intimidation. They were joined at the platform by the colonel, whose military demeanor gave their presentation more authority. He testified, "I came for the official certification. They taught me how to live again, so I stayed." The mission and the measurements are inextricably linked. Abruptly, there was a ruckus coming from the rear of the corridor. The leader of the VA's National Programs Division, a man in a pricey suit, Claire. Everyone stiffened, anticipating that their presentation would be cut off. Instead, he said, "I owe this program an apology. I had trouble falling asleep last night. I descended to observe the motorcyclists pulling up. Do you know what I observed? I witnessed a Legion member assisting a PTSD-stricken soldier in calming down. Saw youths unloading equipment beside senior veterans. Saw firsthand the human connection that has been lacking from our official programs." The hall's vibe changed. Other officials started talking about their personal reactions to the convoy's arrival, the exchanges they had seen, and the changes they couldn't ignore. Marcus, who was now far more respected than when he led the Steel Legion, walked up to the platform. "Are you curious about structure? Gaze outside. Hundreds of bikes, all neatly arranged, old rivals cooperating. Because of a woman who's shown a different type of strength to us in a diner." At last, Pat spoke up, her voice bearing the weight of all the lives she had changed. "Your metrics are important," she said. "Your credentials are important, but they only have value when they support the larger goal of assisting others in discovering their own path." Amy went on to the last slide, which was a straightforward picture of Claire's Corner Diner. "That's where it began," she said. "One location, one instant, and one decision to recognize people for who they are above their flaws. From it, everything else developed, including your successful statistics." An unexpected demonstration marked the end of the presentation. Outside, where the motorbike caravan had gathered into living evidence of the success of their scheme, James urged the officials to join them. Alongside veterans, ex-gang members displayed both certified skills and one-on-one mentoring. "This is what success really looks like," Pat said to the authorities in attendance, "not just in numbers, but in lives changed, communities healed, and bridges built. As the protest went on, Pat was approached by the VA program director. He said, "We came expecting to evaluate a program. Rather, you have revolutionized our understanding of healing." They could watch their success story unfold through the windows of the conference hall. A group of officials followed Amy along the rows of motorcycles, each one symbolizing a life changed and each rider sharing a tale of transformation. "Do you know what persuaded them?" After arriving with coffee for everyone, Martha inquired later. Although the numbers were helpful, it wasn't the numbers. It was witnessing how each story combined the structure they desire with the emotion they require. The day following their presentation, Washington was a hive of activity never seen before. Initially dubious, government representatives were now frantically trying to figure out how to apply Mill Creek's concept across the country. Pat's mind, however, was on a smaller, more important event that was taking place in the hotel lobby. James had been approached with shaking hands by a young soldier who had been watching their presentation yesterday. He said, "I've been living in my car. I've been trying to have the guts to ask for aid after seeing all these bikes arrive yesterday and hearing the stories." James switched into mentor mode right away. Every move demonstrated the abilities he had acquired while transitioning from wolf to a community leader. He led the young man to a seat and stated, "The first thing we learn in our program is that strength isn't about facing things alone. It's about rediscovering trust." Maria hurried over with the conference organizers' latest news. They aim to launch trial projects in 50 cities right away. They refer to it as the Mill Creek Model, a two-track program that combines formal certification with one-on-one coaching. As Amy started to arrange the incoming requests, Pat observed that she was already working on her tablet. The young woman who had assisted in transforming her father from a feared gang boss to a renowned mentor was now teaching officials how to monitor both personal development and statistical performance. "Take a look at this." Marcus yelled and held up his phone. Their presentation and convoy had been well covered by the media. One headline stated, "Veterans and former gang members band together to transform nation support programs." Another was announced by Mill Creek Miracle Goes National. They received additional updates from the colonel who had grown to be one of their most ardent supporters. The motorcycle clubs for veterans are already getting organized. In order to maintain the personal touch throughout the expansion, they wish to set up support networks for every new program location. However, Pat caught a glimpse of James standing silently by the window, observing the motorcyclists that were still coming in. "Do you have any doubts?" she joined him. He pointed to the scene below and said, "No doubts, just recognizing our progress. I spoke to government representatives yesterday about how gang members can serve as mentors. They want to learn from us today how to make it happen everywhere." Even in Washington, Martha had managed to keep their relationship with Claire's Corner Diner going by setting up a coffee kiosk in the hotel lobby. "What's actually changing, do you know?" Serving their regular orders, she inquired. "It goes beyond the policies and programs alone. It's how individuals perceive one another." Outside, Amy was leading an unplanned session for officials, demonstrating to them how their tracking system tracked both personal progress stories and official data. "See," she said, holding up her iPad. "Each certification has a backstory. Both are important and count." There were several meetings with implementation teams in the afternoon. However, they found themselves imparting the more profound lessons they had learnt in Mill Creek rather than only talking about practicalities. To an audience of authorities, Marcus clarified that the mechanics aren't the difficult part. Learning to see past labels is the key. "I believed that being strong meant intimidating others while I was a member of Steel Legion. I learned from this program that it entails assisting others in developing trust." Pat observed as their national model started to take shape. Certified training facilities and community mentorship programs would be available at each new program site. Veterans would collaborate with ex-gang members who had changed their life, each contributing a distinct viewpoint to the recovery process. "What makes this work, you know?" The planning committee was questioned by James. The twin tracks aren't the only thing. It's realizing that everyone who enters our doors has both wisdom and wounds. Our role is to assist them in using both. The hotel lobby had become a makeshift Claire's Corner diner as dusk approached. Around Martha's coffee station, veterans, ex-gang members, officials, and support teams met to exchange tales and plot strategies. Amy yelled out with delight in her voice, "Ms. Mason. In 3 cities, the youth initiatives have already begun. They would like me to assist with their coordinators' training." Watching the girl transform from a fearful daughter to a self-assured leader made Pat grin. She saw James instructing a group of interested officials in motorcycle maintenance through the window, demonstrating to them the synergy between technical know-how and one-on-one mentoring. What did we actually bring to Washington, you know? As she poured more coffee, Martha inquired. We brought more than simply an effective curriculum. We provided evidence that everything changes and you view individuals as potential rather than issues. Outside, the roar of motorcycles persisted, but this time it conveyed a different message. It was no longer just Mill Creek. Finding new routes wasn't limited to veterans and ex-gang members. It was meant to demonstrate to the country that change occurs when heart and structure are combined, when both official achievements and personal tales are valued. The caravan that returned to Mill Creek was significantly bigger than the one that traveled to Washington. As word of their accomplishments got out, more riders wanted to join the change. Pat, meanwhile, was thinking about the little triumphs that had made everything possible as she looked at the never-ending line of motorcyclists in her rearview mirror. Do you know what's on my mind all the time? As he rode along the backup vehicle, James inquired. The diner that first night. How things may have turned out if you had only turned your head away. Let us be an issue for someone else. As they made their way home, the convoy stopped often, each one serving as an unplanned evidence of the effectiveness of their program. They discovered veterans waiting for them at a Virginia truck stop. Former gang members asked for guidance on launching their own reformation programs at a Tennessee rest stop. During a pause to check her tablet, Maria reported that it's occurring everywhere. Our dual-track system has already begun to be implemented in 10 cities. The VA has expedited the clearance process for an additional 30 facilities. After remaining silent for the majority of the trip, Amy eventually spoke out. She showed James her iPad and said, "Dad. Take a look at this. Youth programs like ours are being started by other children. Your narrative has led them to be dubbed Wolf Rising groups." Everyone was taken aback by the name. Wolf, a representation of terror, had been James' gang moniker. It was now evolving into a completely different thing, a representation of change. The colonel joined them at a rest stop and remarked, "You've started something remarkable. I just received word from Washington. A new section dedicated to community-based veteran support initiatives is being established. Their goal is for us to assist in training the leadership teams." Pat watched as Marcus utilized his leadership abilities from the Steel Legion to plan the next phase of the trip and make sure everyone got there safely. He asked, looking up routes on his phone, "Remember when we thought success meant making people fear us? The number of people who trust us to help them change is now how we gauge it." Pat thought more about their trip as they approached Mill Creek. Not only the actual travel to Washington, but also the more profound path from that initial encounter at the diner to this turning point in the history of the country. During their last rest stop before heading home, Amy said, "Ms. Mason. I've been considering the next course of action. With so many new initiatives launching, they must keep in mind how this actually operates. It goes beyond certificates and systems." "Amy, what's it about?" Although Pat felt the girl already knew the answer, she still asked. "It's about viewing individuals as unfinished stories." Amy's response was wise beyond her years. "You did that for all of them, even my dad. You were able to see beyond their current selves to their potential." The initial view of Mill Creek evoked feelings that were not anticipated. The little community that had seen them change had been decked out to greet them. Main Street was lined with banners. "Welcome back, heroes. Mill Creek is delighted to be the starting point for change." Then Claire's Corner Diner appeared. Martha is outside holding her ubiquitous coffee pot. Townspeople crowded the little cafe where it all began, eager to greet them as they returned home. James whispered, "Look at this," as the streets were crowded with a huge motorbike caravan. Who would have imagined that all of this could start with a single incident at a diner? Pat saw James surrounded by proud neighbors while Amy rushed to embrace Martha. The sound of engines filled the air as Marcus arranged the bikes in tidy rows down Main Street. Now, however, it was a triumphant, and celebratory sound. What actually changed, do you know? As she served coffee to the returning travelers, Martha inquired. It goes beyond the policies and programs alone. Not only the people, either. We now comprehend strength in this way. Pat could see the future unfolding through the diner window. New arrivals were already hearing stories from veterans and former gang members who had accompanied them on their journey, with each change serving as an inspiration for others. Amy was assisting other youth in establishing their own support networks. Marcus was assisting in planning the next stage of their growth, while James was training new mentors. As Pat saw the event play out, he realized that the true triumph isn't in Washington. Neither formal recognition nor national programs mention it. Every individual who realizes they can rise beyond their mistakes and history is able to do so. They are more than anyone ever imagined. The roar of motorcycles continued to fill the air as the sun sank over Mill Creek. However, it now had a promise for communities all around the country, not simply their town. It was the sound of change, of salvation, of the limitless potential that arises when one decides to find the positive in people whom others have given up on. The evening sun was painting the sky in shades of gold as Pat sat in her normal booth at Claire's Corner Diner, 6 months after they had returned from Washington. A changed community was now seen in action through the same window that had previously depicted impending trouble. The Veterans Center has expanded to almost the whole block outside. As his daughter Amy moved comfortably among the classmates in an advanced certification class, James replaced her tablet with a practical display of motorcycle repair. Wolf, the notorious gang boss, had long since vanished, to be replaced by a community leader and father who had discovered his own inner strength. Martha put down Pat's normal cup of coffee and remarked, "It's hard to believe it's been a year. Do you recall that evening? When they thought they had an easy target when they initially entered?" They could see Marcus at the head of a group of ex-Stay Legion members who had come from all over the nation through the glass. They had no intention of stirring up trouble. Their goal was to gain knowledge on how to launch their own transformation initiatives. Maria slipped into the booth with new information and reported that the data had come in from Washington. Veteran suicide rates have decreased by 30% in regions with active centers, and 57 cities are currently implementing dual-track systems. In places where ex-members serve as mentors, gang recruitment has decreased by half. However, the numbers did not include the true success stories. They were in situations similar to the one outside, where a young veteran who had previously lived in his car was now instructing troublesome teenagers on motorcycle safety. They followed Amy's journey from a terrified daughter to a national leader in youth programming. Amy walked excitedly inside the diner and cried out, "Ms. Mason. This is something you must see. Do you recall the video from our first night here? The viral one? Someone created a new one that shows everyone's current location." Amy's tablet displayed a video that displayed side-by-side comparisons. The shadow warriors who had once entered the diner with danger have now evolved into prominent members of the neighborhood. Wolf is threatening to use violence. James is currently teaching healing. As the Steel Legion arrives to wreak trouble, Marcus is now setting up networks of assistance. After his class, James joined them and stated, "That's not even the best part. Honey, show her the messages." Amy perused innumerable testimonies from all throughout the nation. Veterans are discovering their purpose. Gang members forging new routes. Old scars are being healed by communities. All of the stories were inspired by that Mill Creek night. Others had given up on the potential in people, but one woman refused to turn away. More news from Washington was brought in by the Colonel. A permanent division for community-based transformation programs is being established by the VA. The Mill Creek Initiative is what they want to call it. But first, they want your approval. Pat observed the arrival of several motorcycles via the window. Not with the menacing rumble of their history, but with the unwavering goal of people coming to develop, learn, and change. The noise that had frightened Mill Creek was now a source of hope. What actually changed, do you know? Marcus, who was bringing his own coffee, inquired. Not only did we cease to exist as we once did. It's because someone at last recognized our potential. Others joined them, and Martha placed additional glasses on the table. Community leaders, veterans, and ex-gang members. All members of the improbable family that had developed from that initial altercation. Pat remarked, "The greatest battles we fight aren't against other people, sometimes," as he saw the transformed lives gathering in the cafe. They disagree with the notion that persons are unchangeable. Amy's father proudly watched as she showed a group of young ladies how to fix an engine in the evening light. They could see the Veterans Center bustling with activity through the glass. As they had always imagined, formal classes coexisted with unofficial mentoring, structure, and heart. "Do you know what I occasionally consider?" Quietly, James inquired. "How nearly we missed everything. If only you would allow us to act like bullies that evening. If, like everyone else, you had turned away." Pat grinned as more people showed up. Some for personal recovery, some for accredited instruction. All of them are a part of the ongo. Change tale. However, it was not the case. Rather, we all gained knowledge about true strength. As the sun descended over Mill Creek, the sky was painted in hues that appeared to capture the coziness of the neighborhood below. The air was filled with the sound of motorcycles, but now it was a symphony of purpose. Every engine stands for a life transformed, a route rerouted, and a future regained. Martha pointed to the view outside the diner window and remarked, "Look at that. Every individual has a narrative of transformation. And it all began here, in this booth, with one individual who was prepared to rise up and recognize the goodness in those who had forgotten it existed." Pat stayed in her normal location as night fell, observing the ongoing transformation of lives. A tribute to the ability to see past fear to the possibilities of change, the diner that had once been a battleground has now turned into a beacon of hope. Lives much beyond Mill Creek would be impacted by the legacy of that first night. Yet its heart would always be here, in a restaurant in a little town, where an old veteran decided to stand up, not with fists or threats, but with the steadfast conviction that everyone deserves the opportunity to improve upon their past. 2 more amazing tales await you directly on your screen in the next section. You won't want to miss these if you like this one. Simply click to view, and remember to subscribe. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.